Dan Pearson has been creating gardens around the world for over 30 years and has received his fair share of accolades and RHS Chelsea awards. He has a reputation for designing naturalistic spaces where the garden sits comfortably within the landscape. But all of Dan's creations are composed so that nature in all of its forms are as much at home as the people it's designed for. Dan's invited me to a private garden set in farmland with rolling hills beyond. But it's not for a client, it's just for himself. You moved out of London to come back to the countryside. What was the drive behind that?
Well, I'm from the country originally in Hampshire, and I'd been living in London, and I'd gardened every single inch of that garden, and I just wanted to feel like I was a much smaller part in a bigger environment.
Right, and I love the fact that as I look out, I just see all the undulations of the hillsides and the trees, and actually, if I'm honest, I don't know where your garden starts and finishes.
This is what I wanted to achieve, so it's great to hear that, because the landscape is the ultimate driver for this. I didn't want it to feel that there was a beginning or an end, because the garden and the landscape are completely interlinked. Mm-hmm. And those blurred boundaries for me are really interesting.
Yeah, you're trying to have that invitation of the landscape coming toward the garden.
Absolutely, so all that we see in the far distance contributes to the near distance.
Before Dan even started designing the garden, he wanted to understand the conditions of this site, which is on a very steep hillside. Did you find the conditions of this site a challenge or something to really embrace?
Well, both. It's an exposed site. We're windy and we're southwest facing, so it's blazing sunshine when the sun's out.
Right.
First few years I was here was really very much about finding the right plant for the right place here and making sure that I wasn't competing with the environment, so that I was gardening with things that were suitable for here. The little ark of plants that I brought with me from the Peckham garden, 3 carfuls, sat here on the hill, and they'd had this very easygoing life in London, you know, and they came here and thought, what the hell have you done? And they tell you very quickly that these conditions are different, and you have to work out why, and then how you mitigate for that. It was 5 years I spent before we actually started the garden.
That's a commitment of time, isn't it? It's not a case of just coming to the site, overlaying a plan and looking up in the book, sunny plant, sunny place. That really is an intense process.
It is, and one of the amazing things about gardening, I think, is the continuity or the process. And the process is often the very best bit. It's not the end result. So for me, because I've always gardened, you know, you're in process with gardening, and finding out where you make your mistakes and finding out where your successes are is just as good as then putting the final thing together.
He started by putting in a vegetable and ornamental herb garden, and once he was happy with his plant choices, he could develop the rest of the space, creating terraces which follow the contours of the hillside and wildflower meadows. As you would look out from your house, what was that view that you wanted to experience?
So my first impression of this place was that it was all about the view. And I didn't want for there to be an immediately obvious garden here. So I brought the landscape right up to the front of the house.
It's that sensitivity of the land, isn't it? It's really observing what's around you.
Allowing yourself to try and understand what a sense of place is at the very beginning is really key.
Here there is a clear context. How can we achieve this in a smaller space?
I think it's just about letting your eye travel and roam a little bit first, and your surroundings, wherever you are, even in an urban situation, are often really interesting. And you can borrow your neighbour's tree. It doesn't have to be yours to contribute to your garden. And the way the aspect of a garden lies, that's going to give you some clues as to how that space should feel, whether it's west-facing and the light comes in the end of the day, or east-facing or the morning. Those things are really informative in terms of how you might then plant the garden.
Okay, there's no excuse then, is what you're saying.
No, exactly. But it's all about just keeping on looking and feeling what it's telling you.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting to hear how Dan has spent so much time experimenting and trialling plants for this site before he even decided where they were going to actually go. And I guess we gardeners can take something from that it is okay to experiment and know that sometimes we are going to get things wrong. The key to it is just take time. I absolutely love this section.
The meadows really drive the aesthetic of the garden, so there's a seamlessness between the two. And what I'm doing is emulating the quality of those meadows and also the way they function together. So in here, for instance, I've brought in cultivated plants that feel very much like the things you'll find in the meadows, like this Scabiosa ocraluca, or some of the grasses that you'll find are just rising through here. So there's this quality of the land coming into the garden and the garden stepping into the land. But the other thing that's most important, really, is that all these plants share a liking for the same conditions. And once you choose the plants that are all happy in the same place, then you can start to play with them as a composition. And then I've got other plants which come through in layers amongst these key players, so that you get one thing superseding the next, as you might in a meadow.
This border is alive. I'm seeing so much activity. And again, that's part of those observations of nature, is it?
The biodiversity has just exploded because we're doing something that's improving the environment through gardening it.
And then as I'm looking out, I can see, with the scabious, because it's nice and floaty and bouncy, your eye just can start to float off.
Travel through it.
Yeah. But things like the self-seeders, how do you manage those?
The self-seeders can really start to take over. So I tend to cut those down just before they seed.
Right.
And I'll sacrifice their winter seed heads.
I like the fact you've got to go in here, Dan. I don't know exactly how you're doing that, but,
You have to maintain a limber quality. Yes.
Yeah. Looking back at the garden, it's just a gentle haze in the distance. This is a grand-scale garden, but there's something that we can all learn from. First of all, understand the site, get to know the soil, get to know what aspect we're facing. And also, as well, our plants, what we absolutely love, so that we can bring in the right plants for the right place that are going to thrive in our conditions. The final ingredient, patience. If we can learn to slow down and watch the process of growth within our gardens, we will create a truly beautiful space.